Imagine breaking a bone. You get an X-ray and you look for that clean, jagged white line.
Right. It's either broken or it's not broken.
Exactly. It's black and white. And we expect that same kind of clarity when we tackle complex subjects like faith and human sexuality. But bring those two forces together, and suddenly the X-ray machine just shatters.
Oh, yeah. It just completely breaks down.
Right. We end up looking at a landscape that is, honestly, incredibly murky. I mean, why is it that when faith and sex are brought up in the same sentence, things usually get instantly awkward, heavily restricted, or just completely swept under the rug?
Well, it is the absolute definition of muddy waters.
Mm-hmm.
For a lot of people listening, the intersection of religion and intimacy has historically felt like a minefield.
Yeah, totally.
You step slightly out of bounds and the whole thing detonates.
Mm-hmm.
You're left with guilt, confusion, and a sense that God is just constantly frowning at your most intimate moments.
Which is really the core tension we are tackling in our source material today. We are taking a deep dive into a fascinating book called Playful Practice. It's by Dr. Roy M. Myers.
Exploring God's love in Christian sexuality.
Right, that's the subtitle. And the mission of this deep dive is to explore a concept that might sound, well, completely radical depending on your background. It's God's invitation for Christian couples to actually indulge in sexual enjoyment and play.
Indulge being the key word there.
Yes. Not just tolerate it, not just endure it for the sake of procreation, but to actively, wildly enjoy it. Okay, let's unpack this because Dr. Myers really wants to completely reframe the conversation around intimacy.
And to accomplish that reframing, we will be looking at two major biblical touchstones today.
Mm-hmm.
First, the highly sensual poetry of the Song of Songs.
Oh, yeah.
And second, the biblical creation story in Genesis.
Mm.
By looking at both, we're going to understand how what the author calls holy intoxication and playful imagination actually foster relational intimacy.
And a closer abiding relationship with Jesus.
Exactly. Both of those things at once.
But I guess before we can look at what God's design for sexuality actually is, we really need to spend some time looking at what it isn't. Because for centuries, modern theology has spent an enormous amount of energy trying to put a leash on this thing.
Yeah, they really have.
We have tried desperately to domesticate sex.
Domesticate is the crucial word here. I mean, it represents a major frustration for the author. He looks at both sides of the theological aisle and sees these well-intentioned but ultimately flawed attempts to tame something that was inherently meant to be wild.
So let's look at the theological right first, right? The traditional side.
Sure. The conservative approach has often domesticated sex by keeping it in a tightly fenced pasture. And that pasture is marriage. Now, to be clear, the author doesn't dismiss the boundary of marriage at all.
Right. He's not saying throw out the rule.
No, not at all. But he points out a very specific, damaging myth that grows out of that heavily policed pasture, which is the promise of automatic ecstasy.
Oh, the idea that simply abstaining and waiting guarantees mind-blowing intimacy the second you say I do. Myers shares this incredibly vulnerable personal anecdote in the book to illustrate the damage this causes. He talks about growing up being constantly told the story of Jim and Elizabeth Elliot.
Right, the famous Christian missionaries.
Yeah, who covenanted to not even kiss until their wedding day.
Yeah.
And the implication handed down to young people was really clear. Wait, do it exactly by the book, restrict yourself completely, and God will reward you with perfect, effortless sexual fulfillment on your wedding night.
Like a transaction.
Exactly. It treated sexual flourishing like a vending machine. Put in your purity token, get out, guaranteed bliss.
But the reality, as the author experienced, and as so many listening to this have likely experienced, is that the promise of automatic ecstasy is a devastating myth.
It just doesn't work like that.
Right. On his own wedding night and in the years following, he realized that sex actually takes incredibly hard work.
Yeah.
You don't just magically flourish because you waited.
Yeah.
You have to learn how to communicate your desires, how to self-regulate your anxieties, and how to actually indulge in pleasure without feeling guilty.
Yeah.
The pasture model just completely fails to prepare couples for the mechanics of real-life intimacy.
It's kind of like, think about it like buying a highly complex strategic board game. Let's say it's a gift for your birthday, but you are strictly told you cannot even break the shrink wrap until the actual day.
So you just stare at it.
Exactly. You stare at the box for months, you admire the artwork, you revere the game, your birthday finally arrives, you tear off the plastic, open the board, set up all the hundreds of little pieces,
And you have no clue what to do.
You sit there in total silence
Yeah.
because you have absolutely no idea how to play. You don't know the rules, you don't understand the mechanics, you haven't developed any strategy. Just because you waited patiently doesn't make you a master at the game.
That's a great way to put it. God's design clearly requires active learning, practice, and, the freedom to make mistakes while you figure it out. But the author points out that the other side of the aisle gets it wrong as well, just in a different direction.
The theological left.
Right. They try to domesticate sex through what he calls a free-range approach. It attempts to solve the awkwardness by stripping away all the fences entirely. It assumes that freedom from all restriction just automatically equals human happiness and flourishing.
So total elimination of limits. The idea that if you just remove the rules, the shame goes away and everything is fine.
Yeah, but it ignores the fundamental reality that we are finite beings who actually need structure to thrive. The free-range approach strips away the beauty of sacrificial love, mutual submission, and discipline.
It turns it into an entirely individualistic pursuit.
Exactly. It becomes about self-actualization rather than a shared covenant. And to synthesize these failures, the author introduces a concept borrowed from the writer G.K. Chesterton.
Oh, the furious opposites.
Yes, furious opposites. God's love isn't a neat compromise middle ground. It holds seemingly contradictory things like deep spiritual sacrifice and wild sensual indulgence in a furious, beautiful tension.
So you don't pick one over the other, you learn to live in the friction between them.
That friction is exactly what makes the intimacy robust. If you just lock sex in a safe little pasture, it dies of boredom and unrealistic expectations.
Right.
But if you let it run entirely wild with no boundaries, it loses its meaning and its ability to bind two people together in sacrificial love.
Okay, so if keeping sex in a safe little pasture kills the passion, and the free-range approach kills the covenant, where do we actually find a blueprint for the alternative?
Well, you actually don't have to look further than the center of the Bible.
Even though it's a book that has made scholars blush for centuries.
Very true. And this brings us to our first biblical touchstone, the Song of Songs. It is an ancient text that completely defies the sanitized, polite version of religious love.
The imagery is vivid, unapologetic, and aggressively passionate. I mean, the text literally compares lips to lilies dripping with liquid myrrh.
Yeah.
The woman talks about wanting to make her lover drunk on the juice of her pomegranates. This is not a side hug kind of love. This is intense, overwhelming physical desire.
Which brings us to one of the most critical and perhaps controversial concepts in Dr. Meyer's book. He uses the term holy intoxication.
Holy intoxication.
He argues that this holy drunkenness, this euphoric ecstasy, is something God actively designed lovers to experience. It is not a byproduct of human fallenness.
Or a distraction from spiritual things.
Right, it's a feature of God's original, abundant design. Lovers are meant to inspire deep, overwhelming passion in one another.
Okay, but wait. Ephesians chapter 5 explicitly commands us not to get drunk on wine because it leads to debauchery.
Sure.
If you grew up in a tradition that emphasizes self-control above all else, holy drunkenness sounds like a massive oxymoron. How is this not just a convenient theological loophole for losing total control and violating that biblical principle?
What's fascinating here is the vital mechanical difference between debauchery and holy intoxication. It all comes down to the management of human agency.
Okay, explain that.
Well, debauched drunkenness, like getting drunk on actual alcohol, is the complete surrender of your human agency to an outside substance. You drink until you forget who you are.
You lose your ability to make moral choices.
Right. You check out of reality to numb yourself. But holy intoxication operates on a completely different psychological track. It resides in a liminal space.
So a threshold space between the mundane and the transcendent.
Yes. In this space, the agency is shared, not surrendered. Couples are willfully and intentionally inspiring passion in one another, but they are doing it while remaining deeply anchored in an abiding, sovereign relationship with Jesus and the Holy Spirit.
Ah, I see. So they aren't drinking to forget who they are. They are leaning into physical sensation to acutely remember who they are with.
Exactly. It is hyper-attention, not checking out.
So the distinction is that you maintain your agency as a responsible creator made in God's image, but you use that agency to freely, actively surrender to the passion inspired by your partner. It's a conscious, willful vulnerability.
It thrives right at the intersection of wild indulgence and extreme self-control. You have to be incredibly secure in your identity and your relationship to let yourself be that intoxicated by another person without fearing that you'll lose yourself.
Okay, I buy the concept of holy intoxication as a theological ideal, but practically speaking, how does a couple flip that switch?
It's tough.
I mean, if they are listening to this right now and they've spent 10, maybe 20 years treating sex as a marital chore or something slightly shameful, they can't just suddenly become passionately intoxicated overnight. The board game is still sitting on the table and they still don't know the rules.
They have to actively build a bridge between their spiritual love and their physical sex. And according to the author's research, the primary materials for constructing that bridge are play and imagination.
Play and imagination.
This is where the practice part of the book's title comes in.
Yeah, the book shares some incredibly candid, real-world examples from the author's study of couples trying to navigate this exact transition. These are everyday people attempting to map their sexual attitudes onto God's love.
Real people dealing with real hangups.
Exactly. They talked about introducing things like lingerie, sex toys, role play, and openly sharing hidden fantasies with one another. There was one woman in the study who had a particularly profound mental shift just by utilizing her imagination. She said she used her mind to simply pretend that God likes sex.
I mean, for someone raised in purity culture, that simple act of imagination is an earthquake.
Right. For her, imagining a scenario where her sexual intoxication was actually pleasing to her creator was the skeleton key. It was a way to mentally grant herself permission to enjoy the physical reality of her marriage without a dark cloud of guilt hanging over the bed.
She had to use play to trick her brain out of its conditioned shame.
Yep.
And this concept of play isn't just a modern psychological trick or a therapy exercise. The author roots this all the way back in the Genesis creation story. We tend to think of God in Genesis as purely a majestic, serious architect, speaking the cosmos into existence.
Sure.
But Myers points out that God is also the original game maker.
The game of let's name the animals.
Yes. Before the woman is even created, God brings all the animals to the first man to see what he will call them. The text says God brought them to see what he would name them.
Like God is just curious.
Right, but God isn't doing this because he lacks the vocabulary to name a giraffe.
Uh-huh.
The game has a deeply psychological purpose for the human.
It's a diagnostic exercise. God knows the man is alone, but the man doesn't know it yet.
Exactly. By naming the animals, categorizing them, and observing them, the man's self-awareness expands. He realizes his own uniqueness. He sees that the animals have corresponding partners, and it highlights his own profound isolation.
So the game was designed to make him feel the ache of his own solitude.
He needed to recognize the void before he could appreciate the provision.
The play created a necessary tension, a longing.
And when God finally creates the woman and brings her to the man's ecstatic response, this is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh, represents massive erotic and relational potential.
Oh, wow.
The playful exercise led to acute awareness, which laid the groundwork for a profound ecstatic connection. Play is the prerequisite for deeper intimacy.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting to me. Think about this concept of sexual play and fantasy like professional war games.
War games.
Yeah, in the military or in high-level corporate strategy, professionals run simulated war games. They do this to safely test unproven theories, anticipate adverse outcomes, and build their reactive skills in a completely contained, low-stakes environment.
Sandbox where failure doesn't result in actual casualties.
Exactly. For Christian couples, playful sexual exploration is that safe simulation. They are using play, role play, and fantasy to discover their differences and to safely navigate the deep anxiety that comes with total vulnerability.
They're testing the waters.
Right. They are asking fundamental questions through their bodies like, who are you when you are totally free? Who am I when I let go of my control? And they're figuring out the answers through play.
Play allows them to try on those different roles as if. They can imagine different aspects of dominance, submission, pursuit, and surrender, even if they haven't completely mastered those dynamics in their day-to-day relationship.
It's a learning process.
It's a heuristic process.
Yeah.
They're doing hands-on theological reflection through their bodies. They're learning about the expansive nature of love by physically acting it out in a safe, bounded simulation.
Which is a beautiful picture of what intimacy can be. But, as anyone listening knows, couples do not live in a fantasy simulation 24/7. The war game eventually ends.
Reality calls.
Yeah, we have to pull back and look at how this intense, intoxicating intimacy fits into the mundane, often exhausting realities of daily life. If keeping sex in a pasture was the first flawed model, we need a better framework for integration. This brings us to the author's metaphor of the sex room.
Right. So the Song of Songs, with all its pomegranates, myrrh, and intoxicating passion, represents this hyper-focused, indulgent retreat. It is the sex room.
The door's locked.
The door's locked, the outside world is ignored, and the sole focus is mutual pleasure. But Genesis reminds us that humanity also has a vocation outside of that room. We have an entire house to manage.
We sure do.
You might have the most amazing, intoxicating sex room in the world, but eventually you have to leave it. You have to go clean the kitchen, pay the mortgage, take care of the kids, and participate in your community.
You have to live in the real world. I mean, the garden in Genesis is much more practical and labor-intensive than the sumptuous, purely sensual garden described in the Song of Songs.
Exactly.
God gave humans vocation, stewardship of the earth, managing reality, bearing burdens, and this is where the concept of boundaries becomes vital rather than restrictive. How do we maintain boundaries in the real world without falling back into the trap of domesticating our sex lives into something boring and utilitarian?
Well, the author suggests couples adopt a critical reflection tool called double loop learning to navigate this transition between the sex room and the rest of the house.
Double loop learning. So if the first loop is checking the speedometer to see how fast you're driving, the second loop is pulling over to look at the map to see if you are actually driving toward the right destination.
That is the perfect way to visualize it. Usually couples only ask the first loop question. What are we doing sexually? Are we staying on the road? Are we following the rules? Is this specific act permissible?
Right.
But double loop learning adds the map. It asks the second, deeper question. How do these actions actually align with God's overarching values of relationship, mutual respect, and human flourishing?
Are we heading toward the destination of a healthier marriage?
Exactly.
So you aren't just checking a legalistic box to make sure a specific fantasy or toy is allowed. You are actively evaluating the fruit of the action. You are asking if the act is actually building the relational intimacy God designed, or if it's quietly eroding it.
It forces couples to juxtapose the what and the how. A couple might agree that a certain sexual practice or role play is perfectly fine within the bounds of their marriage. That's the what.
Okay.
But if engaging in that practice is causing emotional distance, triggering past trauma, or making one partner feel used rather than cherished, that's the how. Then it is not aligning with the flow of God's love.
Wow.
Double loop learning forces couples to look past the technical mechanics of sex and focus on the deeper archetypal value God placed on the relationship itself.
It is moving from a static rulebook mentality to a dynamic relationship mentality. You are constantly recalibrating based on the health of the connection.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this ongoing recalibration is exhausting.
Yeah, no kidding.
This structured relationship, the day-to-day work of living out your vocations, managing the household, processing your own traumas, and trying to maintain this wildly passionate sexual bond, is incredibly hard work. The author points out that navigating this reality, what he calls the wilderness east of Eden, eventually forces couples to the very edge of their human capacities.
Because we are finite. We get tired, we get selfish, we misunderstand each other.
Yes. On a purely human level, sexual partners will eventually hit an absolute impasse. The tension of holding those furious opposites, the sacrifice and the indulgence, the daily grind and the ecstatic play, will become too much.
Their own human love will fail.
It will run dry, or it will get overly anxious and protective. And that is exactly where the Christian element of this entire framework becomes paramount. When human capacity fails, it creates a holy space where Jesus steps in. The author introduces the concept of an asymmetric alignment.
An asymmetric alignment, that sounds like a chiropractic adjustment. What does that actually mean for the listener when they hit that wall in their own marriage?
Imagine a couple holding a heavy piece of furniture together. It's a 50-50 split of the weight. That is the symmetric alignment of human marriage.
Okay.
But when they hit that impasse, when they're entirely drained and drop their side, the relationship doesn't crush them. Why? Because Jesus steps in to hold the heavier end of the tension.
Oh, I see.
He is the perfect embodiment of those furious opposites. He is fully divine and fully human, perfectly sacrificial and perfectly joyful. When a couple reaches their limit, they look to him not just as a rule giver, but as the ultimate ethical framework and the sustainer of their union.
He provides the grace that holds the system together when their finite love just isn't enough.
Exactly. They abide in him, and his asymmetric lifting allows them to rest, recover, and continue growing.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? Let's pull these core insights together. If you have been taught your entire life that faith and sexual passion are basically enemies, or that God only tolerates intimacy for the sake of making babies, this deep dive turns that entirely upside down.
It really does.
Sexual play, imagination, and holy intoxication aren't distractions from a serious Christian life. They aren't dirty secrets you have to keep hidden from God. According to Dr. Meyer's reading of the scriptures, they are vital, necessary tools intended by God's design for your flourishing.
They are the very mechanism by which finite, messy humans learn to intimately navigate the complex, furious opposites of God's love. You don't just learn about God's love by reading a textbook.
No.
You learn about his expansive, pursuing, deeply knowing love by actively, playfully exploring it with your spouse in the safety of your covenant.
And it means that boundaries and rules in a relationship aren't there to domesticate you into a boring, predictable routine. They are the sturdy walls of the house that provide the safe container. They lock the door so you can explore wildly and playfully in the sex room. You need the boundary to feel secure enough to truly let go of your inhibitions.
Which raises an important question, a really fascinating, broader implication of everything we've discussed today. The text reveals how the friction of these furious opposites in romantic sexual love is actually a masterclass in understanding the complex, multi-layered love of God.
Yeah.
The anxiety of being different from your partner, the struggle to understand their foreign desires, the profound joy of finally connecting across that divide, it all teaches us about how divine love bridges the gap between creator and creation.
So the marriage bed is just a localized expression of a much larger cosmic reality.
Exactly. Which leaves us with a provocative final thought for you to consider. If God uses the intense, playful exploration of our differences in marriage to reveal his divine nature, what if this principle extends beyond the bedroom?
Oh, I like where this is going.
If friction, tension, and fundamental difference are features, not bugs, of God's design, how might your non-romantic friendships benefit from this framework? How might your local community relationships, or even the way you interact with people you deeply disagree with, change if you applied a little less domestication? What if, instead of demanding everyone be exactly the same, think the same, and stay in their safe little homogeneous pastures, we brought a lot more playful curiosity to the table about the differences between us?
Now that is something to mull over. We like things clean, black and white, like that broken bone on an X-ray. But maybe the muddy, complex, intoxicating waters are exactly where we are supposed to be learning how to love. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll catch you on the next one.